So if you had to guess, and this is just a curious question.
Yeah.
How long did you do this traveling around to bars with your bags around the corner? How long of a time was that? Okay, welcome to the Look Like Somebody podcast. I'm your host, Ricky C. Simmons. You know, I need a favor from y'all. I'm going to ask you every week until you guys do it. I need you to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so that you'll get notified every time we post something new. I always go out and look for guests that have very interesting stories so that I can learn also. And, man, I think I did a great job today because I'm going to learn right along with y'all. So we're going to just jump right in this. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, man, thank you for coming. Julie, I don't know much about, we had a little brief conversation prior to the show, but I don't know a lot about what you do. So before we get into that, I need to know who Julie is because I've only met you like one time and it was brief.
Yeah.
So can you tell me who Julie is?
Yeah. Well, I am a wife, a mother, a grandmother of three.
Okay.
And I am from Omaha, born in Colorado Springs, lived there for a short time. Of course, I don't remember that.
Okay.
But then we moved to Omaha and actually lived in Council Bluffs for a while my mother ran a nonprofit there. And came back to Omaha and been here ever since. Okay,
now, so basically, even though you weren't born here, you pretty much grew up here.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, now, you was telling me before the show also about your story. I'd like to know more about your story, if you don't mind, or whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah. Well, I grew up like a lot of people in a dysfunctional home. So my mother and father got divorced when I was about 5 and grew up in a fairly abusive home.
Okay.
I put fairly in there, but the truth is, it was just abusive.
Gotcha.
Right. Try to soften it up a little bit, but that's the truth. And because of a lot of heartbreak in my life, I grew up making some bad decisions and really ended up becoming a vulnerable individual that was abused in many different forms.
Gotcha.
And ended up being in a situation where I was sexually exploited a number of times and was a victim of trafficking, which I didn't know and realize until years into my recovery.
Wow. I just got to say something while I'm thinking about it. When a person is put in these very difficult situations like you have shared, first of all, the fact that you're still here, that's very impressive to me. And I want you to get back to your story, but I just want to say I'm already hearing courage. That's what I'm hearing. And I'm coming from a standpoint of a person that has no knowledge of that topic. I have no way of trying to say, yeah, I know what you're talking about, because I don't.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I think the message that you're getting ready to share with us, I got this weird feeling that it's a message that unless it's something you have personally experienced, there's no way a person can tell you they know how you feel.
Yeah, right, right.
So
right.
back to your story now.
It was now my story is different than other girls' stories. And so I always felt like mine wasn't as traumatic, right, as some of the others that
Gotcha.
I've met and I've talked to. And so I tried to keep that on the down low more so because I didn't feel it was comparable. But it was, I'm a very faith-filled person. So I very much believe in God. And I believe in the power that God can provide in healing. And I believe that I slowly realized and discovered that I was in these situations and actually God protected me.
Gotcha.
And because people have choice, people make their own decisions.
Correct.
And so many people say, well, why would God, make that happen? Or why would God allow this to happen to me in my life? Well, he can do anything. I fully believe that.
Gotcha.
But he's given us free will. And sometimes the bad guys make bad decisions. And they use people to create those bad decisions or to make those bad decisions on. And I ended up in situations where there was sexual abuse, there was physical abuse, a lot of violence. I grew up in a lot of violence. And where I grew up thinking men were scum of the earth and awful people.
Wow. That's a difficult, to say the least, environment to try to grow up in. I'm still just listening because like I said, right now, I'm like the audience. I'm being educated as well. So please continue.
Ended up because of where my heart was, and my self-esteem, lack thereof.
Okay.
I turned to alcohol and became an alcoholic.
Really? Okay.
Mm-hmm. And
at what age did you become an alcoholic?
That's a hard one because my father was an alcoholic.
Oh, okay.
And I ended up are you from Omaha?
No, I'm from a little town called Greenville, Texas.
Okay. Oh, nice. Well, there used to be a place in Omaha when I was a teenager. I was 17 when I went to a place called Epley Treatment Center.
Okay. I've never heard of that.
Way back when.
Okay.
And I went there. I was a ward of the state as a teenager. I was in foster care. I was in the Douglas County Youth Center. I was in the Lincoln Detention Center. And I'm trying to think what else, but I was a part of the Sarpy County system as a teen. So when I turned 19, I was free. At least I felt like I was free.
What do you mean by you were free?
Because in the state of Nebraska, adult is 19. So once I turned 19, I was no longer a ward of the state.
Oh, so you could go out on your own.
I could do what I wanted.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
So I wasn't being controlled by a county anymore.
Gotcha.
I had my daughter at the age of 19. And then there was a point in my life my mother took my daughter from me and kicked me out of the house. I ended up homeless without my daughter, and tried to commit suicide one day because my mom took my daughter. Wow. And I thought my life was over. My daughter's father was extremely abusive. I went from abuse to abuse to abuse.
I'm seeing that pattern, yeah.
And he was extremely abusive. He spent time in jail for abusing me. And I spent time living here and there, and couch surfing is what they call it. And then I'd go to the bars.
For those that don't know what couch surfing is.
So couch surfing is when you're homeless and you go spend the night here or there and here and just use their couch to sleep on because you have nowhere else to go.
Wow, okay.
And then you move on to other people's couches.
I mean, I don't even know what to say to that because that's so foreign to me.
Yeah.
But I know it's real because you don't have a reason to make this up.
Right.
So please continue.
Yeah. So that's where some of the exploitation comes in as well, because vulnerability is a big piece in human trafficking and sexual exploitation, just being a vulnerable person. So I was in a vulnerable situation. I had no home. I had no vehicle. I was actually living partially in a friend of mine, their vehicle, until they threatened to call the cops on me and say I stole the car because I wouldn't give it back because I had no place to go.
Right.
I lived out of 2 trash bags, and so I would go to the bars, which is really when my drinking picked up.
Gotcha.
I did remain sober. In those years, I remained sober about 5 years, and then ended up drinking again, and ended up going to bars, finding people to stay with.
Gotcha. You know something? You hit a nerve when you said that you stayed sober for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that movie before in my own life, so I can definitely relate to it. And you know, I don't have any stats to back this, but just from what little I do remember from being in the criminal justice system myself, I found out that that's the longest they give you. They anticipate 5 years or less, and you'll be back. So for you to stop for a while and then start back in 5 years, I can relate.
Yep.
Please carry on.
So that's what I did. I would meet men in the bar, and I'd go home with them because I didn't have a place to live. I had my trash bags around the corner of the bar. I kind of have this little running joke. I have no idea to this day how my bags didn't end up missing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I had an alarm clock in there and clothing and shoes, and I would take those with me wherever I went. And this is why I giggle at it, because there were so many things I look back on now that I can see where God protected me.
Gotcha.
And so that was a spiral. That went.
So if you had to guess, and this is just a curious question.
Yeah.
How long did you do this, traveling around to bars with your bags around the corner? How long of a time was that?
You know, one of the things I can't quite remember. I've thought about this, and I can't put my finger on it. It was on and off for a good couple of years.
Wow.
And, you know, eventually I ended up with my own place. It was a studio apartment. Because there were a couple times that I was homeless. It wasn't like one. I mean, there were a couple different little stints in there where I didn't have a place to go.
Right. Okay.
And for some reason, whether it's the trauma, I'm not quite sure. I can't quite figure out the timeline.
Okay.
I think it's trauma, but I think there's still some processing I have to do in that.
Right.
And so I think we're always healing as a human being.
Yeah, I always say that you're either winning or you're learning. You know, that's just kind of one of my Ricky-isms. You know, another question I have for you is, when you're homeless and you're doing whatever you have to do, got respect for that. Not downplaying that at all. But that's got to be a somewhat scary ordeal altogether, because this world that we live in the older I get, the more I realize how unsafe it really is.
Yeah, I ended up in situations that were not great.
Yeah, I can see that.
And there was in the first part of my homelessness,
Okay.
I ended up running into someone I used to know and hung out with them for the night because I didn't have anyone else. And he had an apartment downtown. And so he said, well, why don't you stay at my place? And he had a roommate, and the roommate tried to take advantage of me, and somehow I got away and ran downstairs. That was in the day of payphones.
Yes.
And I remember calling a church from a payphone, collect, because I had no money. And pleading for some help. And I ended up staying with a neighbor I just met in the hallway. So I didn't end up back in that same apartment with that guy.
Right.
And they let me stay there. It was a young married couple, and they let me stay there. And the church picked me up the next day.
Wow.
And then there was a couple through that church that let me stay at their house for a while.
You know, I'm just listening to you, and I'm kind of in awe because a lot of people don't survive those conditions.
Yeah.
You know, so again, I gotta say, there is a God, because you were very vulnerable, a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, you were consistently at a disadvantage. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to be nice about it as well, because I don't know what it's like.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't ever want to be that person that, oh yeah, I got an idea what you're dealing with. That's a lie. I don't know what you're dealing with. So I'm very curious, but when the church came and picked you up, mm-hmm. what was next? I
was happy that I felt safe.
Gotcha.
I felt safe. That was probably the best way for me to sum it up at that moment. And I started going to church with them, started going to the youth group that they were a part of. Mm-hmm. And I quit drinking at the time. I used to smoke. I quit smoking at the time. I started feeling like I was getting close to God. And with their mentorship, with their help. And again, allowing me to stay in their house. And I got a job because I didn't have one. I got a job. And they helped me get on my feet. And the church helped buy a car for me because I didn't have a vehicle. And then I was able to move out on my own. That's where I got my studio apartment.
That job you got, was that your very first job?
No, it wasn't my first job. Actually, my first job was when I was 15.
Okay.
Way back when. I mean, living at home before any of this happened.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because a lot, I mean, there was abuse in my home at the time.
Correct.
It was when I was 17, I was actually raped by a kid from high school at a party. And that was my first experience. So it was after I was 17 and after that assault that everything changed. Like everything within me changed. Because this guy took my virginity away.
Gotcha.
He took that from me. And I, after that, I was kind of a mess. And I didn't tell anybody. There was only a couple of people I told from my school, my friends. But I kept that from my mom. I didn't turn it in. I thought it was my fault because I was at a party and I was drunk.
Let me ask you this. Why did you feel like you couldn't report it?
Because I thought it was my fault.
You didn't?
Because I was drunk and I was not even 21. So I was 17.
Okay.
So I thought I did that.
Yeah.
And it's a lie we tell ourselves. I didn't know it at the time.
Wow.
But there's a lot of that happens where people don't report it.
Well, see, and that's another thing that kind of puzzles me. The fact that I understand why you didn't now, listening to you, but that person that did this, they pretty much had no consequences, is what I'm hearing.
Well, I found out not that long ago he did. I mean, I believe there's consequences for our actions.
Okay.
And I think he suffered those consequences later in life.
Gotcha.
And I'll leave it at that.
I got you. And you know what? I'm glad you said it that way.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times in life, no matter what the situation is, I'm always big on treating people the way I want to be treated. But I think for me personally, it's real important that I make sure that it's understood that I'm not expecting them to do that in return, because karma and consequences, they take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very easy for me to understand what you mean by okay.
Mm-hmm.
Continue on, young lady. So what was next?
So I ended up in my own studio apartment, had a job, felt good about where I was heading. And, but there was still one problem. I had continued to drink, and my drinking got worse and worse and worse and worse.
So when you say drinking, and I'm trying to clarify for the audience, is some people say, well, it's just beer. So your drinking was beer plus alcohol.
Yeah.
I have to make that clear to people, because I know quite a few people that think just because they only have a beer, that it's no big deal.
Well, that was my alcohol of choice.
Beer was?
Yes.
So that kind of started the ball rolling.
It did, and I drank every day.
Wow. I don't know how to say this in a nice way, so I'm just going to be honest with you. Drinking every day?
For a long time.
Wow. Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah.
I have my thoughts on that, but, this is your story. I want to hear it.
Yeah. So, shortly after that, I meet this guy in a bar, and he ends up my first husband. And it was, I can honestly say to this day, it was definitely not a marriage made in heaven.
Gotcha.
It was not a marriage at all.
No problem.
It was a lot of infidelity, a lot of lies. It was a very deceptive marriage. It was and I wouldn't say abusive by any means, but there was this man I was married to was an addict of sex.
Gotcha.
And it destroyed the marriage. I mean, but there was also things that I contributed to in the marriage that was not. It was no way this marriage was going to last.
Speaking of lasting, how long did that last?
It lasted a total of 7 years with dating. So we were, I think, together 4 years and then married 3.
Gotcha.
And then divorced. And then my drinking got worse after that.
Wow. Now, after your divorce, were you homeless again or no?
No, I wasn't. I actually moved out of the house we were in and moved into an apartment with my daughter.
Oh, okay.
I ended up getting my daughter back. So,
Okay,
yeah, that's
good.
a piece of my story. So there's different,
Yeah.
I ended up getting I actually had to take my mother to court to get my daughter back because she wouldn't give her back.
Oh.
So I had to take her to court and won and got my daughter back.
Well, you had to be doing something positive in order to even go to court and have a chance to get your daughter
Yeah.
back. Because I know how those courts look at things.
Yeah,
I've been in front of enough judges.
Yeah.
I feel qualified
Yeah.
to speak on that.
Well, and, I at this time didn't realize I was an alcoholic or becoming an alcoholic at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that wasn't something I discussed. But one thing that I did change about myself was I was a high school dropout. So I dropped out of high school and I went back to school and did very well, had a 4.0 in school. It was a trade school, so I was a medical assistant. And then later on, years later, became also a surgical technician. So I assisted in surgeries as well later on in life. But started off as a medical assistant and did very well. So I had a job working for doctors and had good insurance and things like that. And that was a very positive step for me. So when the judge saw that I was making all these efforts to better my life and I had completed school with a 4.0 and was working and whatever, the judge couldn't have kept my daughter from me.
Gotcha. So you got your daughter back. You moved into an apartment.
Yep.
What was that like? Because and I don't know the answer to this question, but I'm just curious. Had you been able to spend a lot of time with your daughter prior to living with her?
Yep, I did. I went and visited her at my mom's. Mm-hmm. I would stay the night every Christmas or, be over there for holidays or birthdays, things like that. But again, and I always say to people, my daughter has her own story to tell someday.
Right.
She doesn't now, but she will someday have her own story to tell. And there are hurts there that she's justified to have with me.
Gotcha.
And I have since then asked for her forgiveness and acknowledged the things I'd done wrong. And of course, she was lovingly accepting my apology. But you still don't forget things.
Oh, no.
There's still,
right. You can forgive, but you won't hardly forget.
Right. So my daughter and I are very close. We are, she's one of my best friends to this day.
Got you.
And my husband and I now are very, very involved in the grandkids. They're a huge part of our lives, but also I'm sober. I'm not drinking. I've been sober now over 13 years.
Huge congrats.
Yeah.
I was going to ask that question, but I'm real reluctant to ask that because sometimes people don't know how to take that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean it in a derogatory way, but I just think it's somewhat important to just know that. So 13 years, huge congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's and people, and I just want to say this before we get back to your story. People will look at a person that's not drinking anymore, and they still want to help God do His job, and and try to judge you. I so clean and sober myself, so I can relate to that.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about it is, a lot of people will say they're happy for you, but your gut tells you something totally different.
I know.
And you can usually just feel it without anyone saying anything because I've seen it. I've only been sober 15 years. So
that's great.
But I mean, the reason why that's why I can relate to that part of it because I understand just how difficult it is. And, and people think, oh, well, you just stopped drinking, life's got to be better for you. No, the same things that were going on when you were drinking, they're still going on when you're not drinking.
I know, but now you deal with it sober.
Correct.
Yep.
And that's, to me, I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
So very proud of you for the 13 years sober.
Yeah, thanks.
But continue on, please.
Yeah. So that really, getting divorced, but working, things were okay, except I was just gradually getting worse and worse and worse in my drinking. I eventually married my husband now, who he and I were friends long before we ever dated. So I'd known him, and we hung out with the same circle of people. And I to this day believe God knew he was a match for me. I believe God put him in my life. And so when he and I first started dating, I was heavily drinking still. Again, I mean, you have to remember, my drinking didn't, of course, get better over the years. You know.
Oh, yeah.
Addiction gets worse.
Absolutely.
And it was in our marriage that I got sober. It was in our marriage that I went from the medical field and working for, the last job I had. I mean, I worked for some of the best doctors, I think, in Omaha. And I left that job to start a nonprofit. Well, who does that? Because, nonprofits don't generally, well, they're not I don't believe in getting paid $1 million for salary.
Let me say this to that. I have a nonprofit.
Okay.
You're preaching to the choir now.
Yeah.
I mean, just getting donations sometimes can be very challenging.
Right.
But no, I mean, you left a well-paying job.
Yep.
To start a nonprofit.
With great benefits too.
Wow. And to start a nonprofit, which I personally know, I end up spending my own money on my own nonprofit because of lack of.
I know. So
Yeah, because of lack of donations, because you got to have all these things in place, like, a tax person. And they send the invoices. They're never late either.
No, they're not. No.
So I can totally get that part. I want to talk about that, though. I want to talk about your nonprofit. Yeah. So what caused you to want to walk away from a job to start a nonprofit?
So the best way for me to explain it is... in the time I was still drinking, my dad, who I had an estranged relationship with, but he and I would talk every now and then, and I craved having a father. To put this in perspective, I grew up as a child daydreaming I had a father in my house.
Wow.
Literally daydreamed about it. I wanted my mother and father together so badly. And so that's where some of my hurt comes from. Not having him in my life, I think, is where I became boy crazy at a young age.
Gotcha.
I longed for that male figure to love me. And so when I found out that my father had stomach esophageal cancer, which was due from his drinking.
Wow.
The last 2 years of his life, he and I actually developed a relationship. And I say a real relationship. And he drank until the end. And that is what opened my eyes. I didn't want to be like him. Okay. I didn't want alcohol to create a stomach cancer in me or anything else, because I know alcoholism causes all kinds of diseases, including cancers.
I want to say this before we go further with that. A lot of times, as a society, I think we miss the point. Just because it's so-called legal,
right,
doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for you.
Right.
I've got a couple of thoughts on that because I, too, once smoked cigarettes. I actually smoked cigarettes for 35 years. So I don't smoke cigarettes. Yeah. And when I run into some of my friends I grew up with, they say, man, why you quit smoking? I said, and I always got a response to questions like that. And I told one of my friends, I said, when they, that little label on the side of the pack of cigarettes, the warning label, when they change that label to smoking these will extend your life. Until that label shows up, I'm just not going to smoke.
Right.
I mean, I don't knock people that do.
Right.
I just choose not to.
Yep, me too.
Yeah, I mean, and then too, here's another part of it. I don't know about you, but I'm very I'm a frugal. I live frugally. I don't just go out and throw money away. I mean, I go where I want to go and do what I want to do, but I'm very careful about it. And I just recently was out of state, and when I was traveling, I stopped to get gas. And they had a sign on the counter when I was paying for my gas, and a pack of cigarettes was like $11.
What?
That's what I said. I was like, $11?
Oh, my word.
I mean, when I quit, they were like $5, and I was complaining then.
I know. That's right.
So what I'm trying to say in a nice way
my.
is the alcohol, tobacco, if that's your thing, get real
Right.
get motivated doing what
Yeah.
you do. I'm not here trying to play God, okay?
Yeah.
But that alcohol being under that legal label I was talking about, it does quite a bit of damage.
Sure does.
And
Sure does.
sounds like your dad
Yep.
was proof of that.
Yep, it was. And he died from it. And then in February, I had a half sister. Mm-hmm. My dad had a daughter before me.
Mm-hmm.
And she just died of alcoholism as well in February of this year. And I think, wow, that could have been me.
Yeah. Very
That could have been
easily.
me.
Yeah, very easily.
I mean, her organs shut down from alcoholism. So I am grateful today I'm sober.
Well, I'm grateful that you are as well, because I think, the fact that you figured it out before it got to be terminal,
Yeah.
I just think that's a win.
Yeah.
But I still want to get back to this nonprofit.
So I started going to church because I was just hurting. My heart was hurting.
Okay.
Because my dad was dying. I was still drinking at the time, and I knew I had to quit. Like, at this point, I knew I had a problem, and I didn't know how to quit. I tried. I didn't know how to quit. I craved it by this time in my life.
Yeah.
So I started going to church, and I could just feel this heart change in me. And one time at the end of church, I remember I'm sitting there and I'm shaking. I'm sitting in my chair at church, and I my body's shaking because I felt like I just desired Jesus. I felt this, like it was like a magnetic thing. I don't know, something that was like everything that had been missing in my life. I was being drawn to the one thing that filled it. And so I later on, I accepted Christ as my Savior, which I thought I did as a kid way back when. I don't know. If I truly did or not, who knows? Who cares at this point?
Right.
But I had what I call is a radical salvation.
What do you mean by that?
So I believe in my experience and during this time, I had felt such a shift, such a desire to want more in my life, and the way that I felt that I was going to feel the love I had been missing my whole life was through that relationship with Jesus. And so I call it a personal surrender. Like, we talk about when you get sober, there's a humbling. You got to humble yourself.
Correct.
Okay. Well, it was no different than that. It was like I had to humble myself in this moment to realize that I was not making the right decisions. And it wasn't just the drinking. It was personal decisions. It was the way I was treating my husband. It was the way I treated my daughter. It was all the way down where I realized I needed to make a change of me. And I knew that I could only do that with the power of Christ in my life. And so that's where I talk about this personal surrendering of me and letting God have all of me. Asking God to do his will in me. And I wanted to be a different person.
I noticed you said you kept referencing humble. That's a really big deal with me personally. I mean, I'm not asking no one else. If you want to be who you want to be, it's fine. But I really believe in humble. I think being humble allows you the opportunity to have an open mind. I mean, it doesn't mean your life's going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that life's going to be easier. But being humble, I think, is very important. Now, when you accepted Christ in your life, which I agree with that as well because I'm on that same page. You started a nonprofit.
I did
because
I felt this burden. I believe that once I let God have me, okay, have control of me, I was no longer in control of me. Like I was so done trying to control me.
Yeah.
And my life and everything around me, because I'm a control freak.
Yeah, at least you owned it.
Yeah, I mean, I still struggle with it today, but I then had this. I would go to bed at night with this strong desire of how can I help women? How can I help women? And I'd wake up with this strong desire. How can I help women? I got to help women. I got to go out there and I got to help them. Women like me. Women that felt like you were nothing. Like you were a piece of junk your whole life.
Right.
I wanted to help those women. And I didn't know how. I didn't know where to go about doing it. And so I met with my pastor's wife this day, and I was talking to her about it. I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. And she said, pray, ask God to reveal to you what he wants you to do with it. He's put a burden on your heart, and ask him to show you. So that's what I started doing. Well, lo and behold, I start a support group for women, and it was so successful. And then I had my own radio show at a radio station where I had a sponsor pay for it.
Okay.
And I would bring women in once a week, and we would talk about how their life had changed from where it was to where it is today and how God changed it. And then I didn't know this then. I didn't realize it was human trafficking of women is where God wanted me to be and land. I didn't know that. I just thought it was all broken women.
Wow. That's amazing because you had no clue when you started the nonprofit.
I didn't.
That it was going to lead you there. Wow.
Nope.
You just started it on faith?
Yeah. I did. I was like, well, let's see what happens. I guess I'll just do this and we'll see what happens.
Now, how did the human trafficking element come into play?
When women started coming to me for help. And one of my very good friends, who is still a very good friend of mine today, she says to me, Julie, I think you need to be praying because I really think God wants you to make this a human trafficking ministry. And I said, no way. He wants me to help all women. Like, why wouldn't he want me to help all broken women? Why just a particular kind? She's like, I'm telling you, I just really feel like that's what he's doing. You just really need to pray about it. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, right. I got you.
So I would pray about it. And I could feel God starting to shift things and change things in my thinking. And I started getting more women that were coming to me wanting help somehow, getting away from their trafficker, spiritual help, whatever. And they were trafficked. So finally, I'm kind of fighting God on this. And I'm praying. And I remember exactly where I was at. I was in my kitchen, and I'm pacing between my kitchen and my living room. And I'm talking to God out loud. And I said, wouldn't you want me to help all women? And then all of a sudden I get this feeling and I get this, but nobody's doing it in my name. So I was like,
gotcha.
You want me to help women who are trafficked and show them who you are? Because no one else is? Like no one in Nebraska. Gotcha. And that's the truth. There was nobody else in Nebraska.
See, I would have never, prior to meeting you and having this conversation, I knew trafficking exists, but I didn't know to what extent.
Oh. And
I didn't know that it was so big in this state. See, I'm no offense before I say this, but I came from Texas, so Nebraska was kind of you know, it was a little slow to me.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
initially when I first got here, but the more I'm listening to you and I've heard other people reference, man, human trafficking is a problem.
Yeah. Big problem.
And it's not everywhere else.
It's here.
Yeah, that's what I was getting to. Exactly. So, gosh, go ahead. I just want
So I'll kind of fast forward a little bit. So long story short, I started this nonprofit. I'd never started a 501c3 before.
What's the name of your nonprofit?
Well, so it used to be Rejuvenating Women.
Okay.
So it used to be Rejuvenating Women. I started that in 2012.
Okay.
And we ended up with a home for female survivors, adult survivors of trafficking, where they could live for up to 2 years and recover from sex trafficking. And I had staff 24/7 that were there. And it was a really good program. And in March of 2024, let me back up, in August of 2023, so God started showing me it was time to have a home for trafficked girls, minors, under the age of 19, kids. And so I started working on that. It took me about 3.5 years. And then we finally found this house, and it was the vision that God had given me was it was like an animal therapy ranch. So I ended up with a couple farm animals donated, and ended up with a total of 5 horses. 2 of them were mini, and then 2 pet cow that were bottle fed and raised. One of them was a mini Highland cow, cute as can be. The other one was a blind cow. And they were kind of like brothers, and they were little pistols, but man, they loved me. And it was called cow cuddling. I know it sounds silly, but you get a survivor of trafficking around these animals and you see a different girl.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
right.
And I know from my personal experience what it's done for me. So anyway, let's speed up. So we get this house, and I'm at the house every day getting it ready so we can start housing kids. Started the licensing process with the state of Nebraska, the whole 9 yards. Started working with other nonprofits and being able to refer girls to the house. And March of 2024, my board fired me. And
wow,
no notice, no warning, no write-up, no... I hadn't even had a board review of me as executive director in 12 years. And they just fired me. And so I won't get into the whole specifics about that.
I got you.
That is its own conversation a different day. But there is, I do have that in the legal process right now.
Gotcha.
And so... I then started Innocence Freed.
Say that again?
Innocence Freed. So then I started Innocence Freed.
Okay.
Last April, because I kept hearing God say, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Even though I had lost my job, my, payroll, I wasn't getting paid anymore. Everything was gone.
Yes.
My name was getting dragged in the mud. And I was depressed. And I was in a position where I felt like, is this even what God wants me to do anymore? I have discovered in this last year that my identity was wrapped up in that ministry.
Gotcha.
I was that ministry. But that's not what God wanted. God wanted me to always put him first. My identity is wrapped up in Christ. It's not wrapped up in a job, a ministry. It's not even wrapped up in my husband. My identity should be wrapped up in who I am in Christ. And that's all that should have mattered. Easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely.
Come on.
Yeah. No, I get it.
But there's so much I've learned in this last year from God allowing that to happen. And again, God putting me through this refinement fire that today I can see so much more clearly. And I right now am helping more survivors than I could have imagined.
Well, let me ask you this before I forget it. What you're doing currently, how, if someone happens to be listening, how would they reach you?
Either by email, phone.
Could you share that information?
Yeah. So my email is julie@innocencefreed.org.
Okay. The reason why I wanted you to share that is because a lot of people suffer in silence, like I heard you say you started off suffering in silence. Mm-hmm. And I want them, if someone knows somebody that knows somebody, to pass that information on to them, because at the end of the day, it's still about helping people. And that's what I get from what you're saying.
It is.
Yeah, because if you're not helping people, I mean, really, you're hurting them.
Don't you think that's why we're here?
I think so. You know, but I also have to admit this. When you're into helping people,
Mm-hmm.
the support seems to drop off
I know.
from the general public.
I know.
You know, but and I don't like to really try to put anybody on blast or where they feel like they owe us something.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is this. I just noticed what I noticed. I've seen people that I would consider doing things that were non-productive get way more support than people like yourself. That's just what I've noticed. I could be wrong, but that's what I see.
Yeah, and it's frustrating when you know what you're doing and when other people in your life know what you're doing that are close to you, but other people don't necessarily know what you're doing because they don't bother to even sit down and ask you.
Correct.
What difference are you making, Ricky?
Yeah.
You know, what are you doing to help others in the community? Whatever that might be, right?
Right.
There are sometimes people are judgmental and they come to their own conclusions. And when I lost my job with my first nonprofit I started,
Okay.
I lost a lot of friends.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Trust me, I know.
A lot of supporters.
Yeah.
Because if you choose to believe a lie over the truth, then I don't want you in my life anyway.
That's something I can identify
Mm-hmm.
with. I have, for the most part, I agree with that so much that I've kind of restructured my life to the point to where I'm very comfortable being by myself.
Yeah.
Because I would rather be by myself because I know who I'm dealing with.
Yep.
Versus having a large number of people around me that really just waiting on me to fail.
Right.
Or wishing me to fail.
Right.
So I always make it a point to understand that, Ricky, you're trying to do something positive. You're going around the country speaking and helping people not make bad choices and especially not go down that drug and alcohol road. Mm-hmm. You're trying to uplift people to make better choices. But the funding for that is basically non-existent, you know. But, you know, and I used to get real confused, and this is just my personal deal. I used to get confused when I would get asked to go to places to speak and do these things for free. But when I show up, everybody where I'm at are on paid status.
Yeah. Same thing for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so we have a lot more in common than I can realize.
Yeah.
And, you know, before this conversation, I mean, like I said, I didn't really know you, but, and this is going to sound bad, but I don't mean it that way, but it's nice to know that it ain't just Ricky.
Yeah. No, hey, it's nice to know it's not just Julie.
Well, you know, I'll put it this way. Even though we know now what we know, we're going to still continue doing what we do because that's what we were put here to do.
Right.
And I respect that about you because it's real easy to just say, you know what? I'm done with this.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's just not working out for me.
Yep.
But I think it's helping others because at some point, this life is going to come to an end for everyone. And then when you look back over it, if you have that opportunity, you can say, well, what did I make a difference or not? And in my heart, whether anyone else agrees with me.
Amen.
I feel like I'm making
Amen.
a difference.
Amen.
So I just think that's
Amen.
important.
Again, that's our purpose.
Right.
And that's the thing I had to come back to and realize is this is God's purpose for me.
Right.
I know my purpose. People sometimes go throughout their whole life not knowing their purpose.
Yes.
I at least know my purpose.
To me, that's priceless.
Yeah.
Because there's no way you can put a value, especially a monetary value,
Right.
on that.
Right.
Because the feeling that, and I'm sure you can relate to this, the feeling that you get inside far outweighs anything
That's
that
right.
you can explain
That's
to
right.
anyone else.
That's right.
Well, Julie, I'm just very honored that you took time out of your busy schedule.
Yeah, thank you.
To come and share. And this, I have one last question because we got to get ready and get out of here. But doing this human trafficking thing, when you first started doing it, did you realize it was as bad as it was?
No. Mm-mm. No. Like it's as we've been sitting here.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably been, on average, approximately, and the numbers have been done, about 40 people trafficked within this hour. Today in Omaha. In just Omaha. And that's on one website online.
Wow. I've been educated on something today, and I'm going to chalk this day as another day of, I'm going to chalk it up to another day of learning. Again, thank you so very much for taking time out to come. And I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for what you're doing. And please don't get discouraged, because that's what society seems like it wants us to do,
Right.
is get discouraged.
Yeah.
But as I always say, my quit button's broke, and I'm pretty sure yours is too.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, we'll wrap the show up, and I'll just say, everybody, thank y'all for tuning in. Also, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you will get notified when we have future shows that come out. Again, thank you. Thank you for your time. And I wrap the show with the same saying every week. Every day you blessed to say, it's just another day in paradise. And you have to look like somebody and do that for yourself. Thank y'all. We'll see you next week.